The intention here is not to glorify or criticize, it's to understand. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever worked hard to build something, whether a career, a business, or a system, only to realize that one day the very thing you're most proud of might quietly turn into your biggest limitation? Not because it failed, but because it worked too well. Most people never encounter that problem. Their challenge is survival, not relevance. Reed Hastings faced the opposite dilemma, and instead of protecting what worked, he chose to slowly dismantle it, knowing full well that doing so would cost money, invite criticism, and create years of uncertainty. This is the story of Netflix, and of a founder who decided that profit could wait. Reed Hastings was born in 1960 in Boston, Massachusetts, into a structured and disciplined household. His father worked for the U.S. government, including roles connected to the Nixon administration, while his mother was involved in education and community work. After finishing high school, Hastings did something that, in hindsight, feels unusual for a future Silicon Valley CEO. He joined the Peace Corps and spent 2 years in Swaziland, today known as Eswatini, teaching mathematics. This experience left a lasting mark. Hastings has later explained that living and working in a developing country forced him to become comfortable with ambiguity and responsibility. There were no complex systems to rely on, no layers of management to hide behind. Problems had to be solved directly, often with limited resources. When he returned to the United States, Hastings pursued computer science and earned a master's degree from Stanford University, one of the most competitive technical environments in the world. He entered the software industry at a time when growth was fast and expectations were high. In the early 1990s, he founded a company called Pure Software. The company scaled quickly, went public, and was eventually acquired. From the outside, this looked like a clean success story. Internally, however, Hastings came away with a different conclusion. He later admitted openly and repeatedly that he struggled as a manager during that phase. The company grew faster than his ability to lead it effectively, and weaknesses in communication and decision-making became increasingly visible. That self-awareness would later shape Netflix more than any line of code ever could. The idea that would become Netflix emerged in the late 1990s, at a moment when DVDs were just beginning to replace VHS tapes. DVDs were smaller, lighter, and far easier to ship, a detail that turned out to matter far more than it initially appeared. Hastings and his eventual co-founder, Mark Randolph, began exploring whether DVDs could be rented through the mail. Netflix was founded in 1997 with a relatively simple concept. Customers would choose a movie online and receive it by post. In its early form, the business looked familiar. Customers paid per rental, late fees applied, and the overall structure resembled Blockbuster's model, just without the physical stores. The problem was that it didn't work very well. Late fees frustrated customers, logistics were expensive, and growth was limited. Netflix was surviving, but it wasn't thriving. That's when Hastings made a decision that would quietly change the company's trajectory. Netflix would eliminate late fees entirely. Instead of charging per rental, Netflix introduced a flat monthly subscription. Customers could keep DVDs as long as they wanted and return them when ready, without penalties or pressure. From a traditional business perspective, this approach was risky. Revenue became predictable, but costs did not. Customers might hold on to DVDs longer, inventory could bottleneck, and margins were uncertain. Yet customer behavior changed almost immediately. Subscribers felt trusted, not managed. They watched more, stayed longer, and recommended the service to others. Netflix complemented this shift by investing heavily in recommendation technology, not as a flashy innovation, but as a practical solution to help people decide what to watch next. By the early 2000s, Netflix was growing steadily. It still wasn't highly profitable, but it was learning about customer behavior, logistics, and scale. And most importantly, it was building trust. In the year 2000, Reed Hastings approached Blockbuster with a proposal that is now often referenced as a turning point. Netflix suggested a partnership in which it would operate Blockbuster's online rental business, while Blockbuster would promote Netflix through its physical stores. Blockbuster declined. At the time, this decision was not irrational. Blockbuster dominated the market, online rentals were niche, and Netflix was still a relatively small company. This moment did not immediately decide the future of either company, but it revealed a difference in mindset. Netflix was thinking about what might come next, while Blockbuster was focused on maximizing what already worked. Netflix returned to building quietly. By the mid-2000s, Reed Hastings was already preparing for a future beyond DVDs. Streaming video, at that point, was far from ready. Internet speeds were inconsistent, bandwidth was expensive, and licensing digital content was complex. Most importantly, streaming was not profitable. Nevertheless, Netflix launched streaming in 2007 with limited content and modest expectations. For years, it remained a loss-making experiment, funded almost entirely by the DVD business. Here lies the most unusual decision in Netflix's history. Instead of squeezing every possible dollar from DVDs, Hastings allowed the DVD business to finance its own replacement. Netflix did not optimize for short-term profit. It optimized for long-term relevance. This approach ran against conventional corporate logic. Most companies protect their most profitable product. Netflix treated its own success as temporary. Hastings later summarized this philosophy simply: if you don't disrupt yourself, someone else eventually will. In 2011, Netflix misjudged its audience. The company announced that DVDs and streaming would be split into separate services, prices would increase, and the DVD operation would be rebranded as Quickster. The backlash was swift and severe. Subscribers canceled, the stock price fell sharply, and public criticism intensified. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a strategic and communicative failure. Reed Hastings responded publicly, taking responsibility for the decision. He apologized, canceled the Quickster plan, and reversed course. What he did not do was abandon streaming. The mistake wasn't the direction, it was the execution. As streaming matured, Hastings recognized another vulnerability. Netflix depended heavily on licensed content, leaving it exposed to rising costs and shifting studio strategies. The solution was expensive and uncertain. Netflix would create its own content. This required massive upfront investment and long time horizons. When House of Cards launched in 2013, Netflix committed to an entire season in advance, guided by data rather than tradition. The strategy worked. Netflix evolved again, moving from a DVD rental company to a streaming platform, and finally into a global content studio. Each transition reduced short-term profitability while increasing long-term control. This story isn't about perfect prediction. Reed Hastings didn't know exactly how streaming would unfold. What he knew was that DVDs would not last forever. He chose relevance over comfort, learning over optimization, and long-term positioning over short-term margins. Netflix lost money for years not by accident, but by design. Netflix offers an uncomfortable lesson. The greatest risk is not losing money. It's clinging to a model that no longer fits the future. Reed Hastings didn't wait for disruption, he practiced it. And sometimes, the smartest move isn't optimization, it's replacement.